Hello, I'm doing a movie review, and the movie I want to review is From Dusk Till Dawn. Now, From Dusk Till Dawn came out in 1996, and the film is written by Quentin Tarantino based on a story from Robert Kurtzman, and the film is directed by Robert Rodriguez. Now, of course, Quentin Tarantino, prior to this, wrote and directed films like Reservoir Dogs and Pulp Fiction. He wrote True Romance and wrote the original story for Natural Born Killers. And he would go on to write and direct movies like Jackie Brown, the Kill Bill movies, Death Proof, Inglourious Bastards, Django Unchained, and The Hateful Eight. And Robert Rodriguez, prior to this, directed El Mariachi and Desperado. He would go on to direct Once Upon a Time in Mexico, the Spy Kids movies, The Faculty, Planet Terror, Machete, and Sin City. And Robert Kurtzman, who wrote the original story for this, was one of the founding members of K&B Effects, and he also would go on to direct Wishmaster. Now, when you really break it down, From Dusk Till Dawn is really a loose remake of John Carpenter's Assault on Precinct 13, only with vampires. In fact, one of the characters in the movie is wearing a shirt that says Precinct 13, which was a direct reference to Assault on Precinct 13. There's also a little bit of Night of the Living Dead in here, and Night of the Living Dead was actually an inspiration for Assault on Precinct 13, and there's also a lot of stuff in here that's similar to Dario Argento and Lamberto Bava's Demons, and coincidentally I just reviewed those movies. Now, no joke, From Dusk Till Dawn is one of my top 5 favorite films of all time. I absolutely adore this movie, and even though Tarantino didn't direct this is my favorite Tarantino film, or at least my favorite film that Tarantino is involved with. Even though he didn't direct this, he only wrote it and starred in it, and it's also my favorite Robert Rodriguez film. Now, one of the things I love about this movie is this movie completely fucks around with tone and genre, but it does it effortlessly in my opinion, because the movie starts out as this over-the-top but still somewhat reality-based crime drama film, but then it goes from being a crime drama and it becomes this over-the-top horror comedy, but it does it effortlessly, and even though the tones are completely different between the first and the second half, it still works somehow. It works where if anybody else tried to do something like this, it would probably fail miserably. And even though this is a vampire film, all the vampire stuff doesn't actually happen till an hour in, yet you don't give a shit, because the first half really could have been its own movie, because even the first half of this film is so suspenseful and so gripping that in some ways you almost get pissed that the second half is a vampire film, but that's something I love about it, because I've always maintained that genre is not a set-in-stone thing. A movie can be multiple genres at the same time, and this is a movie that definitely proves that. It's a horror comedy, it's an action film, it's a crime drama, and once again, the tone of the first half is completely different than the tone of the second half, yet it works. It works even though it does feel like you're watching two different movies in the same film. Now, the plot of From Dusk Till Dawn is, it begins with these two brothers who are also criminals named Seth and Richard Gecko, who are on a crime spree, and they're wanted by the entire state of Texas and the FBI. What happens is they end up kidnapping this family who has an RV, and they force the family to take them over the US-Mexican border and into Mexico. And that's really the first half of the movie, which once again is sort of this, like, over-the-top crime drama film. And in the second half of the film, they get to this bar called the Titty Twister, which, given that name, you could probably already guess what kind of bar this is, but it turns out that this bar is run by vampires. Now, in the movie, George Clooney plays Seth Gecko, who starts out the film as sort of the main villain, but as it goes on, he definitely becomes more of an anti-hero. And what I love about this character is he's a piece of shit. Like, he's a bad freaking guy, but he's sort of an honorable piece of shit, because he won't kill you unless he has to, but if he has to, he will straight up kill your ass. But even though he is a bad guy, he does seem to have a bit of a code of ethics, and he's actually relatively fair to his hostages. And there are actually moments in the film where you actually find yourself liking this guy. He also has some great quotable lines like, "Everybody be cool. You be cool." Or, "I said plant yourself. Plants don't talk." And in the movie, Quentin Tarantino plays Richie Gecko, and people give Quentin Tarantino a lot of shit for his acting, but I actually thought he did a really good job in this movie. I mean, yes, he's not as good in other things that he's tried to act in, but I thought he did really good in this movie, and maybe that was because of Robert Rodriguez's direction. But Richie is even more of a piece of shit than his brother. Like, he's a rapist, and it does imply that he's schizophrenic at a few points in the movie. Now, of course, he's not a piece of shit for being schizophrenic, but he's a piece of shit for all these things that he's done, and him being schizophrenic is no excuse for the horrible things that he's done. But it does sort of give you the idea that he might not 100% be able to help what he's doing. Harvey Keitel plays Jacob, who is the father in the family that the Gecko brothers kidnap, and he's actually an ex-preacher because he lost his faith in God after his wife died, and he's a great freaking character, and in the movie you see him start to regain his faith in God, and he kind of reminds you a little bit of characters like Father Callahan from Stephen King's Salem's Lot, or Damien Karras from The Exorcist. Juliette Lewis plays Jacob's daughter, Kate, and I forgot this actor's name, but the actor who plays Scott, who is Kate's adopted brother, I actually liked him in this movie. I know a lot of people gave this kid a lot of crap, but I didn't think he was that bad. Danny Trejo has a small role in this movie as the bartender, who turns out to be a vampire, and Salma Hayek has a small role in this movie, as she seems like she's the leader of the vampires, but something happens where, well, I won't give that away, but Tom Savini plays a character named Sex Machine, who is freaking great in this movie, and he definitely seems to be based on the character he played in Dawn of the Dead. Fred Williamson has a small role in this movie as well, and his character I really liked. Cheech Marin has several cameo appearances in this film as different characters, and one of the best ones that he plays is, like, when they first get to the titty twister, he's the vampire who's going on and on about pussy, and it's freaking amazing. John Hawkes has a small cameo in the beginning, and so does Michael Parks as the character of Earl McGraw, who would actually go on to be sort of a reoccurring character in several of Quentin Tarantino and Robert Rodriguez's films, even though his character dies in this movie, so when he appears in other films, I guess you're supposed to assume that either those are like an alternate universe version of him, or maybe those were set before the events of this movie. John Saxon and Greg Nicotero also make brief cameo appearances in this film. But yeah, all the acting in this movie is great, and the actors really do sell it, and it's the actors combined with Quentin Tarantino's dialogue, and the dialogue in this movie is amazing, and that's something that I don't think you could take away from Quentin Tarantino, despite any sort of criticisms that you might have for him. I don't think anybody can deny that the man knows how to write dialogue. I mean, you could argue whether or not that's really how people talk, but still, regardless, his dialogue is always interesting to listen to. And once again, I just love how this movie really does combine tone and genre, but it also fucks around with tone and genre. And while it is a very funny movie, there are moments in this film that are actually kind of moving, like a lot of the stuff dealing with Harvey Keitel's character of Jacob. I mean, he's a man of the cloth who is really struggling with his faith in God because he's lost his faith, but he still sort of believes as well, and he's a really likable character, and I really like some of the conversations in this film about the existence of God. And admittedly, Admittedly, it doesn't get as deep as something like in The Exorcist, but it's still interesting, and once again, the dialogue is very well written. And the makeup and special effects in this movie are amazing. Now, there is some CGI in the film, but the CGI is used sparingly, and it's CGI mixed with practicals. And honestly, the vampires in this movie are freaking terrifying. Now I want to cut to a short review on this movie done by my friend Christian Feliciano, and I'll leave a link to his YouTube channel in the description below, but here are his thoughts on From Dusk Till Dawn.
There are only a handful of filmmakers whose names alone draw people to the theater, and two of these guys are Quentin Tarantino and Robert Rodriguez. Now, to be honest, I love most of the movies that these guys have done separately, but when the two come together to put together a project, not all the time does it work. For example, Grindhouse is just garbage. I don't know who, I don't know what, I don't know how, I don't even know why Grindhouse exists, but looking back at the whole project, both films and the fake trailers, there's a part of me that wishes I had never been a Tarantino or Rodriguez fan just so I didn't have to hear about it and go, take all my money now. But then there's another part of me that says, you know what? Watching that botched abortion is actually worth it because of the other films they've done together like Sin City and the one I'm reviewing now, From Dusk Till Dawn. From Dusk Till Dawn is a weird film because it shouldn't work at all. First of all, the film is split in two sections. The first part of the film is a crime drama. It doesn't seem like this would fit together at all, especially when you hear that the tone in this film changes from dark and suspenseful to comedic horror. But Tarantino and Rodriguez managed to do a great job mixing all this stuff together. I think this is mostly because of the fact that it's controlled. As grindhousey and B-movie-ish as this movie becomes, you have Tarantino who, yes, was in his golden age, but you can tell that he still somewhat humbled himself. Instead of going completely insane like he did in Kill Bill and Django Unchained, with useless dialogue and scenes that easily could have been cut out, he actually tightened up the script. If this has to do with Rodriguez directing the film, I don't know, but he keeps himself on Earth. First of all, the film is pretty short, so there's less time for him to add all these useless references to things that call back to his childhood, and the characters actually sound like real people. The women sound like women. The men sound like men. The Gecko brothers actually talk the way two criminals would. Not like how the criminals talk in Reservoir Dogs and Pulp Fiction, which are great movies, don't get me wrong. But honestly, criminals don't talk like that. The preacher actually talks like a preacher would, or at least a faithless preacher would. And his kids actually talk like two young people should. And the way they interact with each other feels completely natural. They aren't doing that annoying Tarantino dialogue about trivia that only he and all of his nerdy friends would know. And the directing is controlled as well. Now, I will never say that Rodriguez has ever lost his mind when it comes to his directing, but that's the point. He was in control of what was going on behind the scenes. He knew when to pull back on certain things, which Tarantino didn't. He knew when to go over the top, which Tarantino didn't. And he managed to get great performances out of the actors, which Tarantino does, and then sometimes he doesn't. Now, he does when it comes to other actors, but when it comes to himself, in his own movies, he can't act his way out of a paper bag. But in this film, Rodriguez actually managed to get a great performance out of him. And that leads me to the acting of this film. The acting overall, phenomenal. Everybody is great. Now, one person feels out of place. This is one of George Clooney's first movies, and he did pretty good. His head shaking can kind of throw you off at points, but what can he do? That was early Clooney, before Out of Sight, his best film. There are also great cameos in this movie. Tom Savini makes an appearance, Cheech Marin shows up in multiple roles, which I thought was cute, and Salma Hayek, who isn't actually a cameo, has a small part in this, and my God. If you ask me how I would like to die, I would say that I would want Salma Hayek to tear my freaking neck off. I don't care if she looks like a giant lizard or not. Overall, this movie is great. One of my favorite grindhouse wannabes. It's fun, it's funny, it's suspenseful, and I can see it scaring a few people. It does have some creepy scenes. If you haven't seen this, please go watch it. If you have, watch it again. From Dusk Till Dawn still stands up today, and it should be enjoyed for generations to come.
So I hope you guys enjoyed my friend's review on this movie. Now, this is a movie that, in my opinion, did not need sequels. This really should have been a standalone film. Unfortunately, this movie did have two, in my opinion, really mediocre sequels. Now, there was a video game made based on this movie, as well as a comic book. And there was also a TV series made based on this movie. I haven't watched the TV series yet, but apparently the series is not that bad from what I've heard. But yeah, From Dusk Till Dawn is an amazing movie, and if you haven't seen this yet, I highly recommend it. Now I want to cut to another short review, this one done by pretentious film critic and escaped mental patient Pierre Chesterfield. Wake up. Hey. Yo, Pierre, you want to wake up? Hey. I really can't waste too much time here. These short reviews that I include in my reviews are meant to be short. Wake up.
What? What? Oh, right. The review. From Dusk Till Dawn?
Yes.
Right. Oh god, that movie's a fantastic, thrill ride of a time. George Clooney coming in hot during the ER times. ER was a doctor show that George Clooney. That was like an early George Clooney movie. I mean, you know, that's one of his big that kind of brought him to the mainstream. Yes, George Clooney, very Hollywood's favorite leading man. Yeah. The movie's great. Written by Quentin Tarantino, directed by Robert Rodriguez. One of my personal favorites. Juliette Lewis, Harvey Keitel, so many other, Danny Trejo, Salma Hayek. It's basically about these two bank-robbing brothers, played by George Clooney and Quentin Tarantino.
I already explained the plot, Pierre.
So what do you need?
Just your thoughts, man.
I thought the movie was great. I thought it was a great film. George Clooney, definitely one of my favorite George Clooney roles. I'd love to see him do another similar role like this movie. Very edgy, very brooding. But at the same time, you want to root for him because he may be a dick and a criminal, but he's a great guy. Tarantino is great in this movie as well. Very underrated actor. A fantastic director and writer. Takes place in a titty bar. And newsflash, it's not the titty bar you want to go to. Because it's haunted, run by a bunch of ravenous vampires that'll kill you. Everybody be cool! You be cool!
But yeah, that was my review on From Dusk Till Dawn, and my next movie review will be on From Dusk Till Dawn 2, Texas Blood Money.